the schools, that would be the government institutions, should not know more about a child than his own parents do.
Yeah, that's the problem of the parent, you f***ing moron. That is an inadequacy of the parent. If the school that your kid goes to knows more about that kid than the parent does, that's a you problem, Matt Walsh. If the people at the school that your kid goes to knows more about a variety of things related to your child, you are failing as a father. You are failing as a parent. Maybe clean your own room before worrying about what other parents are doing. So speaking of irrevocable, reprehensible, lost causes, I suppose, we've got Matt Walsh here. Insane, non-binary, quote-unquote, male camp counselor sleeps in girl's cabin. So this is a story that's going around a little bit currently in conservative circles that has, surprise, surprise, been completely overblown. I recently did a video on Marjorie Taylor Greene where her comments, literally just openly advocating violence against trans people on Alex Jones's show, were as a result of this sensationalized story. And now obviously, you know, Matt Walsh is going to traffic in this as well. Here's the actual article. This is the KTLA 75 years LA's very own. News you could trust, I'm sure. Controversy erupts after parents of Los Alamitos 5th graders learn of sleeping arrangements at camp. A group of parents of students at Weaver Elementary School in Los Alamitos are upset with the Los Alamitos Unified School District after learning about the sleeping arrangement at a school-organized science camp in San Bernardino County. Quote, "No parent should feel the way I feel after knowing what could have happened to my daughter," said parent Susie Johnson. The parents say their 5th grade girls told them some of the biologically male counselors at Camp Pali in San Bernardino, who use they/them pronouns, spent 3 nights sleeping in cabins with the young girls. Quote, "I contacted the school and asked them if they were able to confirm that there was not a man actually sleeping in the same cabin as the girls. They were not able to confirm that," added parent Rachel Sandoval. Quote, "Per California law, we place staff in cabins they identify with. Emmy Tage, assistant director of Camp Pali, confirmed. Parents say they are not accusing anyone of a crime." Very important to note this specific passage. Parents say they're not accusing anyone of a crime, but they are angry the school district did not let parents know about the camp policy. These parents say they just want others to be informed of the policy so they can make their own decisions for their own families. Quote, "It's awful that children had to even experience this in 5th grade camp," Johnson said. "If I was aware of it and I had initialed something saying this was going to be done at this outdoor science camp, I would have kept my children home." A spokesperson for the district told KTLA the district takes all complaints and concerns seriously and is currently investigating. Then on Monday, a spokesperson sent KTLA a statement indicating there had been no biologically male counselors in shared cabins with female students at the camp that they are aware of. Quote, "While counselors may have used the pronouns they/them, the use of these pronouns is not restricted to biological males. Biological females also use those terms." The statement read, quote, "Pali Institute is an equal opportunity employer and always has been, with the diversity and inclusion among its core values. Its commitment to diversity and inclusion applies equally to its students. Pali Institute's priority is, and it always been, to ensure the health and welfare and safety of its students, the strict..." Cool. So that's this article, and this is the clip that was played from it, which essentially just reiterates everything I said. To connect this to Marjorie Taylor Greene's open advocacy for violence against trans people, we'll add this article on as well. Republican Congress member Marjorie Taylor Greene advocated for violence against trans people in an appearance on conspiracy theorist Alex Jones' InfoWars show on Wednesday, the same day that Texas Governor Greg Abbott ordered state agencies to investigate the parents of transitioning children for child abuse. This is the major charge that is made from a lot of anti-trans people out there. Greene was referencing a story making the rounds of conservative media about non-binary counselors at a school science camp in California sleeping in the same cabin as young girls. Quote, "I think it's straight up evil," Greene said. So the camp, the Pali Institute Outdoor Education Program in Running Springs, told KTLA in Los Angeles, so that's the article we just read, that non-binary counselors who slept in the same cabin were not, quote-unquote, biologically male. Andy Wexler, the camp's owner, also denied it. Quote, "We can tell you for sure that did not happen," Wexler told Fox News Tuesday. "As much as we can without looking down somebody's pants. While counselors may have used the pronouns they/them, they used it, we already went through that. But that didn't stop Georgia Rep. Greene from fantasizing to how her husband would react if he found out their daughter was sleeping in the same cabin as a transgender woman. Quote, "If I was a parent and my 5th grade daughter had to sleep and shower in the same kind of cabin as..." There's been no allegation of any kind of activity when it comes to showers. If staff will even shower with the kids or how that goes on. The sleeping arrangements at the camp were the ones in concern. I don't know where this comes from. The shower claim might be entirely made up. The original article does not claim anything about showers. "That guy he'd be in jail," Greene said. "He would be in jail." Quote, "Well, first off, my husband would have beat him into the ground and then he'd be in jail," Greene added. "But this is exactly how we need to stand up against this stuff." So he goes on to note that trans people are 4 times more likely than cis people to be assault victims, trans panic defense and all this kind of thing. So no one, not even one of the parents of campers who've spoken to Fox News and other outlets, accused non-binary counselors of abuse or any crime. So we'll see what's up with that when it comes to the video. By the way, just as an addendum, I suppose, Marjorie Taylor Greene also just completely misgendered Democratic Representative Marie Newman's child during a debate, which is, standard fare, really. Very profitable to be transphobic as a public figure. But anyway, so after reading all this, we all understand the contents of the article as much as we can of the story at hand from the official sources that are reporting on it. We've got one from KTLA, we've got another accounting from Vice News. So let's see what Matt Walsh has to say about the whole situation. Because, I imagine it'll be a well-reasoned, factual, logical take. It has to be. I mean, Matt Walsh, he's got a big brain. Ostensibly, he knows how to use logic and I would imagine knows how to read. So we'll see. We'll see what's up. Perhaps I will be pleasantly surprised.
So, much can get lost amid the cacophony of perpetual phony outrage, and it can be hard to discern any...
Speaking of perpetual phony outrage, depending on where this video goes, we might be also participating in that, aren't we going to be, Matt Walsh? Very interesting stuff. Perhaps maybe not the best way to start the video.
Any one bit of outrage from any other. You've probably still noticed over the last few weeks that people on the left are very angry at Florida. And they're always...
Also Texas now.
Angry at Florida. They're angry mostly that Florida is thriving while they live in gray, dreary cities covered in human feces and used heroin needles. You can hardly blame them for being a bit envious. But the professed reason for all...
Nobody's envious of Florida, by the way. Literally nobody's envious of Florida. Florida has been consistently the laughingstock of the country, especially over the COVID pandemic, but also just in general. Like, there's kind of this mythology of Florida man, and that Florida is just like a backwards, insane place where, who knows what can happen. Man bites dog type shit. But, nobody cares.
The anger towards Florida this time, in recent days, has been a particular piece of legislation called the Parental Rights in Education Bill. Now, even if you don't live in the state, it's worth tracking this story because much can be learned from it, I think, and especially from the reaction to this bill. So the law would bar schools from discussing sexual orientation and gender identity with kids in elementary school.
Interesting. So what would be the reason for this? Let's find out. Florida gay bill. Let's go. We'll find it this way. Let's look at NBC News. Perhaps a biased source, some may say. Florida's House of Representatives passed a bill Thursday that would prohibit quote-unquote classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in the state's primary schools. The legislation, titled the Parental Rights in Education Bill, but dubbed by critics the Don't Say Gay bill, heads to the state's Republican-held Senate where it is expected to pass. Blah, 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 blah. So what did it do? Speaking of legislators on the House floor, Rep. Joe Harding, the Republican who introduced the bill, said the measure is about, quote, empowering parents and improving the quality of life for the state's children. Interesting. Harding has repeatedly stressed that the bill would not prohibit students from talking about their LGBTQ families or bar classroom discussions about LGBTQ history, including events like the 2016 attack on the Pulse nightclub, a gay club in Orlando, but critics have said that the broad language of the legislation could open districts to lawsuits from parents who believe any conversation about LGBTQ people or issues to be inappropriate. So I'm trying to find, what's the use case? Why is this a good thing to do when it comes to Republicans wanting to pass it? It seems like the pro-this bill stance is to prevent the harm done to children. Now, what harm is being done? We don't know. We're not being told. At least I can't see it in this article. Perhaps another article would give me more information. Let's briefly read through this. Is the BBC, which, from the UK, bruv, not a very big fan of the transgender people. So it's all about parents' rights to know what's going on in school, which literally nobody on the left disagrees with. Nobody on the left has the take that parents should have no say in what goes on in schools. It's just that the fact of the matter is the amount of parents that have such concerns, I imagine, is being way overblown. This bill does not institute some kind of democratic process where the parents of children attending these schools have some kind of a say in what is going on in the schools. Anyway, let's get back to this fucking loser.
And this has provoked volcanic fury from the left, who have dubbed the legislation the Don't Say Gay bill. Mm-hmm. They claim that this is, among other things, an attack on free speech.
Well, it is.
Of course, the idea that adults have the free speech right to have inappropriate sexual conversations with children.
How do you constitute inappropriate sexual conversations with children? What is Matt Walsh's take on when sexual education should start being taught to kids in school? What is his take on should it even be taught to kids in school? What is his take on when parents should have such conversations with their children? Maybe we'll find out. We probably won't.
Is the kind of thing that you'd expect only pedophiles and perverts and predators to argue for.
Well, that's quite the claim. So first of all, I eagerly await Matt Walsh to substantiate what he means by inappropriate sexual conversations. And to say that only pedophiles, perverts, and predators argue for it is insane. Like, it's patently insane. The idea that teachers in school who are teaching other aspects related to biology, health, physical education, and a variety of other things should not also talk about the biological function of sex, which is literally like the underpinning of humans' ability to like exist, right? Like, all beings have sex to reproduce. Humans are not different. So to teach children in a very sterile and clinical context about these topics is beneficial so that we reduce teen pregnancy rates. We reduce the spread of STIs. We reduce sexual abuse that happens not only between kids in the school and the other kids that they might be engaging with, but also sexual abuse they might be subject to by adults as well, which ostensibly Matt Walsh cares a lot about. If you don't know what constitutes sexual abuse, then you won't be able to recognize it and try to get help should you be subjected to it in a general sense, but especially as a kid. So to suggest that it's only pedophiles and perverts and predators arguing for it is insane. In fact, what I see a lot bear out in a lot of abusive relationships, especially when it comes to adults and the grooming of children, they will make explicit measures to not educate children on such topics such as sex. Because, like I said before, if somebody isn't aware that abuse is happening, if they have not learned that this is okay, this is not okay, this is abuse, this is not abuse, then they won't be able to recognize it. And in the mind of a pedophile, a pervert, or a predator, making it so that those children have a harder time at recognizing that leads them to be able to predate on these children. And if it is your concern that you don't want that to happen, as Matt Walsh ostensibly does have such a concern, then you would want children to know as much as they can in order to recognize when they are being abused so that they can go to help when they need it. That seems to be a good way at reducing child sexual assault.
And it's easy enough to understand why gender identity shouldn't be discussed in elementary school.
So gender identity has literally nothing to do with sex. Gender identity has nothing to do with the act of sex or biological sex. Though obviously Matt Walsh would disagree probably with both of those points because he's completely uneducated on the topic. Gender identity is just how you identify, how you are perceived in society, how you wish to be perceived in society. It has nothing to do with sex at all. It is about the way you dress, it is about the way you present yourself in society, and it's about the way you are perceived by others. If you don't understand that very simple sociological concept, then you get takes like what we're about to hear.
In fact, it shouldn't be discussed in any grade, at any level, because it's an...
So gender identity should not be discussed at any grade, at any level. So maybe not even collegiate level, you know? Just more rampant anti-intellectualism from people that claim to be on the side of facts, logic, and science.
At any level, because it's an incoherent, made-up concept invented, not coincidentally, by a pedophile mad scientist named John Money, who you're well familiar with if you listen to this.
So gender identity is not invented by any one person, you absolute fucking troglodyte. Gender identity, as it exists in society currently, is an invention by society as a whole. The idea of gendered concepts goes back since the dawn of time. When humans first gained sentience, I would imagine, there were some elements of, in those societies, those primitive societies, of how certain biological sexes would behave and present themselves through aesthetic presentation and activity that would correlate to their biological sex and therefore be considered a gender identity. But in the modern context, gender identity is just the way that somebody presents themselves and is perceived in society. If you look at somebody like Matt Walsh, you assume them to be a man, and then from there you might even assume them to be assigned male at birth, meaning they have an XY chromosome, because he presents himself in such a way to exhibit that idea. However, if we look at a person like this, you're immediately going to assume that that's a woman because they've got longer hair, they've got a more feminine face, they're currently posing in a more feminine way, we got longer nails, they're probably wearing makeup as well. There's a variety of things that you would assume them to be women simply because of how they look. However, I can tell you, there are trans women out there who Matt Walsh would incorrectly argue are just men in dresses who look like this. And if you see them on the street and you assume them to be women, your entire ideology falls apart. So it is true that gender identity, gender as a concept, is invented, but it's a broader sociological concept invented by people to try to explain certain differences as they pertain to biological sex, but is kind of outmoded at this point as we've progressed in society.
Gender identity is a religious doctrine.
Perhaps in the way Matt Walsh like subscribes to it, right? So Matt Walsh's idea of gender identity is that people that are born with XY chromosomes, they have to act a certain way. They have to be more masculine, they have to dress more masculine, they have to do boy activities, got to dress in boy clothes, you got to play with G.I. Joes, you can't play with Barbies. That's Matt Walsh's idea of gender identity, and he does engage with it in a way that is tantamount to religion, because he thinks that has to be that way, or it's incorrect, or it's deviancy, it's degeneracy. So in the way that he engages with gender identity, there is an element of religiosity in that. But once again, he's probably just projecting. So, I mean, it is what it is.
It's part of the left-wing creed. It has no basis in science or reality.
This is incorrect. The overwhelming scientific and medical consensus draws very clear distinction between biological sex and gender identity. But we can continue to ignore reality because we can't actually fucking engage with it because we are too dumb or also just maybe too scared to be proven wrong.
Now, if a Christian public school teacher cannot stand in front of his class and declare that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior, and all students should accept him into their hearts, then a leftist public school teacher should not be able to stand in front of his class and declare that boys can magically become girls.
Is that even the case, though? As far as I'm aware, for a lot of religion in school concept, usually it's the case that people are against the idea of the curriculum of the school forcing certain religion onto the kids. So if it's the case that the school ordains that you have to teach religion in the form of Christianity, in this case, or Catholicism, to your students, that is what people are against. He is trying to tie gender identity to religion in order to be like, oh, well, the left thinks that religion in schools is a problem, even though individual students practicing religion in schools is not a problem. In fact, a lot of liberals and left-wing people will advocate for children to be able to pray at certain times throughout the day. So in specific, there are some Muslims that will pray like 3 to 4 times a day or whatever. They might need a specific space to do this. A lot of liberals are actually accommodating of that. They allow for religion to be in schools by individuals practicing in that way. The difficulty there is that Matt Walsh is trying to suggest that, oh, well, the left thinks that literally all religion in school is a problem, which is not the take. It's just this bastardized take that he has because he has to make shit up in order to be convincing in any way to the absolute fucking degenerates that watch him. But also, he's trying to tie that to that as an own to suggest that, oh, if gender identity in his worldview is tantamount to religion, then that should be banned as well. But it's an argument built on a foundation of fucking cow manure. It's not holding any weight. That thing is squishing, it's squeezing out everywhere. It stinks probably as bad as Matt Walsh does. It's not a good one.
Keep religion out of the classrooms, but as it turns out, they only had certain religions in mind, which we've known for a while.
Incorrect.
But what about sexual orientation?
Okay.
Now, it's at least coherent and factually true to say that a person has sexual urges, which are generally oriented one way or another. In fact, John Money also coined the term sexual orientation.
I don't know if this is specifically how it would be considered, but this seems to be like some sort of appeal to authority as an own. Like just because, oh, a certain person coined a certain term, that person and their entire background is also completely and totally a part of essentially the broader concept, when obviously that's not the case. Different societies have different ways they engage with gender identity. There are societies out there that have a third gender. There are societies out there that have non-binary languages that don't have a gendered language. There's a variety of different ways that societies around the world engage with the concept of gender identity. So to deflect or to point out the inadequacies and the bad parts of the person who coined the term, and like I say, I don't even know how substantive any of this shit is not a good argument. This is not an argument based in fact or logic. You're just trying to extrapolate negative elements of a person who invented a term, quote unquote, onto the broader term where that original person who invented it has nothing to do with any of it. The way that these concepts manifest in society has nothing to do with the person who invented the word that describes it. In fact, these things existed before there were words to describe it.
It's coherent. You understand what's being said.
Before the absolute fucking morons in the comments be like, oh my God, you're so triggered. I am excited to talk about this, so I'm going to be exuberant and having fun while doing so because I find this interesting and entertaining for myself, but not only for the people watching me. And if I could be a little bit more loud and be a little bit more aggressive and have fun with it, I'm going to do that. And if you get upset about that, you're melting a little bit like the little snowflake bitch you are.
The question, though, is whether a government employee in the government education system would ever have any valid reason to talk to a 9-year-old about sexual urges.
So we're being explicitly clear about the fact that we are targeting public schools in regards to the government employee at a government school, a publicly funded school. So my question would be, and I don't know if it'll be brought up, what is Matt Walsh's take on private schools discussing such concepts. What is Matt Walsh's take on any of this in regards to private schools? Very curious, because I would imagine there's a lot of abuse that happens in private schools as well.
The answer to that question, obviously, is no. The left says that not only do these adults have good reason to talk about sexual urges with prepubescent children, but even that they...
Ooh, so we're taking a bit of a claim here. We're carving out a line in the sand a little bit. We're not trying to be too committal to it, but he says prepubescent children. Okay, let's find out. What is the average age for a person to go through puberty? So this is saying the average age for girls to begin puberty is 11, while for boys the average is about 12. But obviously there's a different for everyone, anywhere from the ages of 8 to 14. So it's a fairly nebulous thing, but if we stick to 11 and 12, it's been a minute since I've been in school. What grade is 12 years old? Grade 7, 7th grade, okay. 6th and 7th grade. So Matt Walsh seems to be claiming that for prepubescent children, anywhere at or below grades 6 and 7, children should not be taught in a clinical, sterile context about basic biological functions like sex. That's the claim, that's one claim that I can seem to infer based on his language, because he's not gonna stake out any actual claim.
The adults have a right to hold such discussions. To force them to refrain from talking about their sexual urges with children is to persecute them, we're told.
So the framing of this is also sexual urges. So when you go into sexual education in school, they're not talking specifically about sexual urges, because while this might be projection as you suggest, they're talking about sex in a very sterile and clinical environment, like I've been saying. They say that, oh, this is a basic biological function. This is a sperm, this is an egg. When they meet, a baby is formed. How is Babby formed? This very simple shit. They also talk about, STIs, STDs, condoms, birth control. They're not talking about like sexual urges as Matt Walsh is painting this entire thing to be. The reason why he's using such terminology is because it sounds bad when you phrase it that way. When you're saying, oh, these adults in school are talking about sexual urges, that seems to suggest that there is a more intimate conversation being had there, rather than the very mundane and innocuous one in the form of, this is quite literally a basic biological function that humans, but not only humans, but every other animal that reproduces sexually engages with in order to facilitate the continuation of the species. That's all that is.
Moreover, it deprives the children of something that they need, because children before the age of puberty somehow need to talk about a topic that they fundamentally won't be able to understand, and which has nothing to do with...
Fundamentally won't be able to understand? It's kind of the point of schooling, education, especially for children, to boil down very complex topics, simplify them, and deliver that information to the children in a way they can understand. That is quite literally the point of early education. That's how that works. I don't know if Matt Walsh ever went to school. I'm starting to doubt it. It's very easy to figure out.
This is absurd for a lot of reasons, but the main one is that it goes the other way around. You aren't depriving children of something they need by refraining from having inappropriate sexual conversations with them in elementary school. You're depriving them of something they need when you do have those conversations. Namely, you're depriving them of the innocence of childhood.
What? I don't know about you, but a child being abused by an adult and not being able to understand if it's abuse or not because they haven't been sufficiently educated on the topic would also deprive the child of their innocence, would it not? So on my end of the argument, if more education leads to better outcomes in this regard, once again, you are arguing the incorrect position, Matt Walsh. I feel like you have ulterior motives of some kind here. I'm just exceptionally curious how he defines innocence, the value that he sees in it, and how teaching kids about basic biological function when they are of a sufficient age, which in my mind, current policy, let's find out. When do public schools start teaching sex ed? So it says, traditionally, schools have begun teaching sex education in 5th and 6th grade. So around when students are starting to hit puberty, or when some students have started already, or a little bit before. So the idea that we're teaching a variety of these concepts, which by the way, it's hard to define what Matt Walsh means. Like, it would be nice to see like an itemized list of things that he thinks are inappropriate to teach kids, and by what grade he thinks they should be taught them if they had to be. Obviously, his take is going to be that none of it should be taught because he's probably abstinence only, kind of fucking idiot. Which just leads to more harm. But anyway.
Now, leftists, they actually will openly scoff at the very idea of the innocence of childhood. They don't recognize that there is any innocent childhood because along with being acolytes of John Money, even if they don't know they're acolytes of him, they're also acolytes of
Once again, deflecting to random fucking people nobody cares about. You cannot boil down sociological concepts to a single person who coined a term.
Kinsey and the other late 19th and early 20th century degenerates who claim that children are
degenerates.
sexual...
There it is. So when I use the term degenerate, that term is used against me to dehumanize me. Degenerate was often used by a lot of fascists in the past to dehumanize and justify the abuse or killing of a variety of people they saw as degenerates, which was usually minority groups, black and brown people, anybody in the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, etc., etc. Very interesting coming from this guy whose ideology seems to fall on the side of the people that were willing to do that and wanted to do that. When I say it, I am using it in a reclamatory sense because it is used against me. So to hear it from him, very interesting.
Now, that's false, but it turns out that this was not a description, it was a proscription. Children are not naturally sexual from birth, but these quacks would try to change that. They wanted them to be. And they've been trying to change that fact ever since.
So is this taught in public schools? I imagine not. If most public schools are starting sex education around 5th and 6th grade, around when children are starting to hit puberty, I'm failing to see the issue, because earlier in the video, he did suggest that teaching these things to prepubescent kids is a problem. But if it is the case that most schools do start sex education in 5th and 6th grade, then those kids are either right before going through or have been going through puberty. It seems to be right around the time where a lot of hormones are going on and things are starting to happen in people's brains that they don't know how to understand. So you get a clinical education on a basic biological function in school to help you understand it. Pretty simple to me.
And to prevent them from doing so, to prevent the adults from doing that, from sexualizing childhood, that is a personal attack against them.
By the way, this is the side of the fence that's very excited about child beauty pageants, by the way. Just throwing that out there. If we could throw random bullshit that aren't really connected to the thing we're talking about, conservatives, by and large, are the ones engaging in child beauty pageants, which are heavily sexualized and really disgusting.
Outrage was renewed over the weekend after a new amendment was added to the bill, which, according to all the headlines, would require schools to, quote, out their students. Now, the idea of outing an elementary school student doesn't even really make any sense to begin with.
Well, yeah, but if a child has some questions about their gender identity and would like to learn more, and then they go to a trusted adult like a teacher or even their parent, as well, they're like, yo, I've heard maybe on some things about gender. I feel like I'm a girl, but I would like to play with boys' toys like G.I. Joes and whatnot. I would like to dress not in dresses and in pink all the time and all this kind of thing. What does this mean? Help me understand this as the person who ostensibly knows more as an adult. If that teacher helps that kid, they can risk civil suits. They can risk lawsuits. They can risk losing their jobs. The parents of those kids can also risk that.
But the way the headlines are written, it makes it sound like teachers are required to investigate a child's sexual preferences and then set off some kind of alarm. Pull an alarm and alert the whole building if a kid turns out to be gay.
No, this is just your wild interpretation of it. By what we've seen in the actual bill, I think he's referring to the one in Texas now. If a teacher comes to the knowledge that the parent of a student is affirming their gender identity if that child thinks they are trans, then that teacher has a, quote, duty to alert the, let's just look at the fucking bill. Jesus Christ. I'm so tired of having to correct this fucking idiot on all of the dumb shit he says. So the bill goes on to say, there's a duty to report in Texas. Texas is officially saying that you have to report trans youth to family and protective services or risk losing your job. In the bill itself, the bill says, consistent with our correspondence in August 2021, the Office of the Attorney General has now confirmed in the enclosed opinion that a number of so-called quote-unquote sex change procedures constitute child abuse under existing Texas law. Because the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services is responsible for protecting children from abuse, I hereby direct your agency to conduct a prompt and thorough investigation of any reported instances of these abusive procedures in the state of Texas. It does not just involve surgery, by the way, it involves hormones. In fact, it involves even the idea that a kid might be on hormones if the parent is talking to them about it. As OAG opinion number KP0401 makes clear, it is already against the law to subject Texas children to a wide variety of elective procedures for gender transitioning, including reassignment surgeries that can cause sterilization. This does not happen to kids. Mastectomies, removals of otherwise healthy body parts, does not happen. And administration of puberty blocking drugs or superphysiologic doses of testosterone or estrogen. So that's the main one that might happen, is the puberty blocking drugs is the major one when it comes to kids that might happen, which, by the way, are scientifically shown to be completely reversible with incredibly minor to statistically insignificant, if there are any, negative effects after the child goes through the late puberty, completely reversible puberty blockers, and the doses of testosterone and estrogen, which I don't expect many children to be engaging with before they understand if they're actually trans or not. If it is a prepubescent child and they are on a puberty blocking drug, the necessity of testosterone or estrogen are not necessary, because usually testosterone and estrogen are more likely to start appearing in major ways during and after puberty. So if you're blocking the puberty, you don't really need the drugs. Usually those drugs are going to be used for people that have already gone through puberty, or to assist in addition to the puberty blocking if the child has been seen to be by mental medical professionals and the parents to be trans. Texas law imposing reporting state requirements upon all licensed professionals who have direct contact with children who may be subject to such abuse, including doctors, nurses, and teachers, and provides criminal penalties for failure to report such child abuse. There are similar reporting requirements and criminal penalties for members of the general public. So yes, it is not the case that, oh, you have to alert the whole building if a kid is gay or whatever, but it is certainly the case that if the child talks about how their parents are like okay with them wearing a dress or not okay with them wearing a dress, but that child seems to be having some questions about their gender identity, then that teacher has a duty to report to the FPS, the Department of Family and Protective Services in Texas, that is happening. And in that way, the parents are going to be liable for criminal charges. And if the teacher does not, then that teacher is liable for criminal charges. The reason why this is a thing to begin with is to penalize people simply for affirming the gender identity of their child when they're not hurting anybody. All of the harms being stated by Matt Walsh are completely overblown, fictionalized things because he does not live in reality. He is attempting to brainwash the people he is watching without any scientific method to back it up, no logic, no facts, no actual evidence of any wrongdoing. It is a method of suppressing the people who might otherwise be able to educate and help a child who is questioning their gender identity, the parents that are helping their child who is questioning their gender identity, and it's trying to implicitly or overtly force them not to. And in that way, when those children, when trans people in general, are not affirmed in their gender identity and are met with resistance in society, the rates of attempted suicide go up. The rates of successful suicide go up. The rates of depression and a variety of other mental illnesses go up. So if you care about stopping child abuse, stopping people from committing suicide, stopping the harm to any humans, then you would not support this bill, because that is the logical conclusion of it. But obviously, if you live in an alternate reality and you've brainwashed yourself into thinking that anything Matt Walsh is saying means anything and is correct in any capacity, then obviously you won't understand that. So either you want trans people and especially kids to suffer, either you want LGBTQ people or especially kids to suffer, or you want them to be gone from society in whatever way, or you don't support this bill in Texas. Very simple.
Yet investigating sexual preferences is exactly the sort of thing that the bill forbids. That's what they're not supposed to be doing. So the framing doesn't really make any sense here.
What do you mean investigating sexual preferences is what the bill forbids? What does this mean? To teach kids in sexual education about a variety of different sexual orientations in a clinical capacity is not investigating sexual preferences. You're not going to each kid in a case-by-case basis and talking to them about their thoughts and opinions. If a child willingly gives that information in class, like, oh, I've heard of, XYZ, can you tell me about that as the person that's supposed to be teaching me about this? Then that way you could probably deliver the information in a responsible manner, but that's not what's happening.
So the framing doesn't really make any sense here. It turns out when critics say outing...
By the way, we have not talked about the title for more than half the video. By the way, we haven't even gotten to it yet.
They mean is that schools are required to inform parents. And there's a difference there.
Wait, what?
So here's the article from The Hill. It says, a new amendment to...
So he's still talking about the Florida bill then. My bad. But he's wrong on the Florida bill too. As we've seen, this bill literally just means like, oh, if the parent of a child has some backwards views about gender and sex because they themselves have not gotten the scientifically accurate education on the topic, the school cannot, without the consent of the parent, teach standard biological concepts to children and sociological concepts when it comes to gender identity to children without the express consent of the parent. And obviously this will lead to to a lot of uneducated parents who either have a political agenda or are just simply not educated on the scientific and medical consensus on the topic to withhold their children from such education if they see it to be something that they want to do. Which, by the way, will just increase the amount of teen pregnancies, the spread of STIs, the amount of abortions. It would also increase the likelihood of child sexual assault and abuse. So ostensibly caring about abuse of children, this bill completely goes against that idea. It's incredibly backwards and counterproductive to the goals that people like Matt Walsh espouse, that they pretend to care about.
This Don't Say Gay bill would require schools to inform parents of their children's sexual orientation within 6 weeks of learning that the student isn't straight, NBC affiliate WFLA reported on Monday. The amendment was filed Friday by the bill's co-sponsor, State Representative Joe Harding. The bill, which has gained national attention and pushback, bars educators in Florida from talking about sexual orientation or gender identity in primary schools. Parents would be able to take legal action against school districts that they believe have violated the measure.
So we're pro increasing the likelihood that children are harmed. Okay, cool. So I'm glad that bills like this exist, not that because when they get put into place, people are harmed, but because the vociferous advocacy for people for such bills that very easily, logically, and factually facilitate the harm of children essentially means that these people like Matt Walsh are okay with the harm of children. Like, at least there's that utility to the bill existing. The fact that Matt Walsh is pro-child abuse is not a novel concept. We've known this for a while, but at least this bill solidifies that idea.
Legislation required schools to inform families of their child's LGBTQ plus status, but gave an option for exemption for the outing in cases where educators feared it could lead to abuse, neglect, or abandonment. The amendment offers no such exception. Yes, it offers no such exception because any such exception would guarantee that no school would ever tell any parent anything because they could always simply claim that they fear abuse at home.
Well, yeah, if a child withholds information about they don't think their gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth, they might be trans, but they don't know, they are looking for more information, they might have some questions about sexual orientation or whatever. If they're going to a fucking teacher to talk about that instead of their parent, that might be the beginning of your problem. Why does your child not trust you as a parent enough to talk to you about such a concept before a teacher whom they don't share any strict bond outside of the fact that they're a authority figure in the form of a teacher? Why don't your children trust you enough to do that? Maybe it's because the child has understood that these parents might be likely to abuse their kids if they go to them being like, yo, I might be trans or something. I don't know shit. I'm a kid. Can you help? They might be abused. And in fact, this happens a lot.
It's especially true given that the left considers it abuse if a parent fails to accept that their son is really a girl.
Yeah, true, it is. It's not, so let me be more charitable, okay? If a parent does not accept the fact that their child is trans, their gender identity of that child, as described by the child, if the parent does not accept that, and literally the disagreement, that's as far as it goes, the parent's like, yo, I don't agree with that, that doesn't conform to my worldview, and that's literally it, like that's the furthest it goes, I do still think that's a shitty thing to do, and that can be emotionally abusive, but if that's as far as it goes, then at least that's better than the litany of other actual child abuse that happens and manifests as a result of Matt Walsh's ideology.
Girl is really, a non-binary pansexual chipmunk or whatever.
Lamau.
The point of this amendment is not that schools ought to be digging into a child's personal life and then reporting back to the parents. That's close to the opposite of the point. The point is simply that the schools, that would be the government institutions, should not know more about a child than his own parents do.
Yeah, that's the problem of the parent, you fucking moron. That is an inadequacy of the parent. You are a negligent parent if the school that your kid goes to knows more about that kid than the parent does. That's a you problem, Matt Walsh. If the people at the school that your kid goes to knows more about a variety of things related to your child, you are failing as a father. You are failing as a parent. Maybe clean your own room before worrying about what other parents are doing.
I have a right to know what my child is doing at school, what he's...
Sure.
saying, how he's behaving.
I don't disagree with this idea in an abstract sense that, yeah, the parents should be aware of what the syllabus is. They should be aware of what's in the curriculum. They should be aware of how these subjects are taught. I don't disagree with this. But to, especially in the case of the Texas bill, penalize, and even in the Florida bill, penalize teachers and other faculty for literally just answering questions that a child might have without reporting that to the parents is ludicrous. The fact that certain parents might disagree with, like, sex education in school and how it's being taught and would prefer to teach them themselves also leaves open a really wide range of potential abuses in the form of miseducation and everything I've described when I went over exactly how these people are pro-child abuse.
There should not be any secrets kept between students and teachers.
What?
There especially shouldn't be any sexual secrets kept between students and teachers.
What the fuck are you talking about? Literally, like, this man has never taken a sex ed class. He's never seen the inside of a classroom. He probably shouldn't be allowed within several feet of a school. Jesus Christ. Like, does he not understand that the left is against child abuse? Does he not understand that if there is a teacher sexually abusing a child, that's a bad thing? So that's the take on the left? That is the position of the left? That teacher should be met with the fullest force of the law and the justice system if they are doing that? Now, the way he's wording it is weird, but to be charitable, he means that there shouldn't be any secrets kept between the students and teachers, meaning that the parents should also know. Meaning that the students and the teachers shouldn't keep secrets from the parents, but he's phrasing it in a really fucking weird way. I don't know if he's intentionally leaving wiggle room or what, but it's fucking odd.
Only in a culture fully succumbed to madness could that concept be at all controversial.
The parents understanding what their children are being taught is not the problem. It's the legal ramifications that are the problem.
The reason that parents should know this information is that they have a right to know. My child is my child. I have a right to this kind of knowledge about him, especially if it's knowledge that other people have about him. But the other reason is that teachers...
So, like, my question is, why does a teacher know more about your kid than you do? I eagerly await the response.
And there are a great many examples that could be marshaled to prove
that Matt Walsh quite literally thinks that if you have a child, that is your property. Like, it's quite literally what he believes. This is the logical extension of his beliefs. Children are not also human beings with their own interests and thought processes and whatever else. Like, at a certain point, a child starts beginning to think for itself. This is like a big thing that happens, especially during puberty, where a child will have difficulty figuring out what's going on. A lot of hormones are popping the fuck off. Like, all humans experience a wide array of trials and tribulations when they go through puberty, and they obviously have different thoughts and opinions. But I imagine Matt Walsh thinks that, like, if your child still lives in your house, you know, maybe even no matter how old they are your property. You know, they have no thoughts and opinions of their own, and you should dictate everything about their lives. Like, I'm being way too charitable in trying to add these caveats.
But here's just the latest. I'll play for you a local news report.
So holy fuck. So the title of this is insane. Non-binary male camp counselor sleeps in girl's cabin. And we're 9 minutes in and we're finally getting to it.
Out of a California school district, these sleeping arrangements at a recent science camp. Listen.
Micah, the parents tell us that their children came home from camp. They were asking a lot of questions about gender. And
so by the way, it's been a little bit since the video started, but this is the clip from the article we read on the topic. So this is what's directly being referenced.
The parents then reached out to the camp director, who told them that counselors, biological males who identify as they, them, are permitted.
By the way, you don't identify as they, them. Like, those are the pronouns that you use. You might use they, them pronouns. You might identify with they, them pronouns, but nobody identifies as a they, them. Usually they identify as literally whatever gender identity. Usually the standard options are man or woman, and then you get non-binary, gender fluid, and a variety of other shit. They might use they, them pronouns, but by the way, cis people, you know, males and females whose gender identity corresponds to their biological sex can also use they, them pronouns. In fact, there are a lot of cis people that I'm aware of that do. This is not something like essential to being trans or whatever.
Spend the night in cabins.
Oh, by the way, everybody uses they, them pronouns, especially singular they, them. Like, if you don't know the name of a person, so for instance, here's a good example. Let's say somebody leaves their umbrella at a store, okay? And you're just a patron. You go up to an employee and you're like, yo, do you know whose umbrella this is? I'd like to get it back to the rightful owner. And that customer service worker points over in a direction to where the person who owns the umbrella is and is like, oh, that's their umbrella. You have to be delusional to think that this doesn't happen. That is a singular use of the word they that happens all the time to people no matter their identity.
Elementary School in Los Alamitos, a group of parents.
No parent should feel the way I feel after knowing what could have happened to my daughter.
Upset by the sleeping arrangements at a school-organized science camp.
I contacted the school and I asked them if they were able to confirm that there was not a man actually sleeping in the same cabin as the girls. They were not able to confirm that.
However, they did later, by the way. So we read this article, and we read an additional article that went on to give more information. So for that specific person's inquiry, perhaps they did not. But later on, the camp, the Pali Institute Outdoor Education Program in Running Springs, told KTLA in Los Angeles that the non-binary counselors who slept in the same cabin were not quote-unquote biologically male. Andy Wexler, the camp's owner, also denied it. Quote, "We can tell you for sure that did not happen," Wexler told Fox News Tuesday, "as much as we can without looking down somebody's pants." While counselors may have used the pronouns they, them, the use of those pronouns is not restricted to biological males. Biological females also use the term. Literally anybody can use the term.
Say their fifth grade girls told them some of the biologically male counselors at Camp Pali in San Bernardino identified as they, them, and spent 3 nights sleeping in cabins with the young girls.
So first of all, how the fuck do they even know they're biologically male? Second of all, the article goes on to say, parents say they are not accusing anyone of a crime. There is no crime being alleged. They're only hinting at the possibility of a potential crime, and go on to say that they're angry that the school district did not let parents know about the camp policy, which, by the way, I can understand being angry about this. The school should let parents know about such a policy. I don't know why you wouldn't.
They're asleep. They use the shower. They go to the restroom.
What do you mean by use the shower? What kind of shower? There's been no allegation of any showers being used together. Literally, the only time it's mentioned in this article is when Marjorie Taylor Greene talks about shower in some kind of cabin at the summer camp that I paid money to send my child to if my 5th grade daughter had to do this. Nobody's alleging that any shared shower situation happened. And once again, nobody is alleging that any crime was committed.
Now, the parents would go on in that clip to stress that they're not accusing the male adults, the teachers, of doing anything. They're just saying that they're uncomfortable with the sleeping arrangements. They're not making any specific accusations. They're not claiming, for example, sex.
There's been no such confirmation, by the way, that they're male. We already read this. The owner of the camp has denied the allegation that they are biological males.
Sexual abuse, but I think that they ought to claim sexual abuse because that is sexual abuse in and of itself.
Wait.
Even if no.
So in Matt Walsh's argument, sleeping in the same room as another child, if you're a biological male, is tantamount to sexual abuse? With a definition of sexual abuse like this, I fail to see how the term has any use anymore. What the fuck are you talking about?
They're not claiming, for example, sexual abuse, but I think that they ought to claim sexual abuse because that is sexual abuse in and of itself. Even if nothing else happened other than what we're being told. For male adults sleeping with 10-year-old girls, that is abusive, sexual.
What the fuck are you talking about? This is the problem with miseducation. This is the problem with a lack of education. If your understanding of sexual abuse is, by the way, he's wording it very carefully there, is, by the way, by assumed, alleged, biological males sleeping in the same room as the children, as the girls, is sexual abuse? If you're not going to understand like actual sexual abuse. And in that way, how could you possibly identify it and prevent it from happening? It's just another logical extension of the pro-child abuse framework that Matt Walsh operates under.
In and of itself. Without the parents knowing. But they can do it because they
So we're not going to substantiate that claim at all. Okay.
Identify as they, them.
Nobody identifies as they, them. We don't actually know how the people identify. We just know they use they, them pronouns. That's all we know. That's all you know because I've read more about the subject than you have, very obviously.
And this is supposed to make them less of a threat somehow? By some incoherent grammatical technicality.
So Matt Walsh just assumes that all men are just sexual abusers, I guess. So under that logic, we can just assume that Matt Walsh is a sexual abuser, even to children. If it's the case that simply sleeping in the same room as an assumed, because like we say, we don't know, we have no confirmation, the owner has declined that they were, biological males, is sexual abuse. It simply is the take. It's a misandrous take. I didn't know Matt Walsh hated men so much. But apparently Matt Walsh thinks that literally all biological males are sexual abusers and child abusers. Jesus fucking Christ. I didn't know that he dabbled in this kind of misandry.
Discovered the right to have a slumber party with elementary school girls at science camp. The question is whether you trust these sorts of people to have sexual conversations with your children.
Nobody alleged that these counselors had any kind of sexual conversation with a child, by the way. This is not in any of the articles. Nobody has suggested that this happens. So he's trying to tie the clinical teaching of basic biological and sociological concepts to children in school to these counselors that there is no allegation that this has even been talked about between those counselors and the kids. It's just rampant propaganda built on a foundation of paper mache weighted down by the fucking lead ball that the brain that's supposed to be in his skull. It just falls straight through. It's completely meaningless, fictionalized version of reality that is easily factually disproven. You can logically draw a variety of lines that prove that all of this is incorrect if you took any amount of time to look into it. It's very simple. Like, I'm a fucking idiot, and somehow I'm able to figure this shit out. Essentially, the final conclusion, this entire thing, is this. I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Matt Walsh is a danger to children. Absolutely. And I feel like I've substantiated that in a much more robust, rigid, and logical way than Matt Walsh attempted to in this video to the inverse. Like, I don't know how you can watch this guy and take him seriously. Like, you have to be brainwashed. You have to be deluded into thinking that anything he's saying makes any amount of sense. Absolute lunacy. Yeah, if Matt Walsh was a school teacher and he was in charge of sex ed, I would be very excited to stop my child from going to that class. Jesus Christ. In summation, transphobic parents are often engaging in child abuse. The prescriptions that Matt Walsh has for parents if they have trans or LGBTQ children is abuse, and if not, they lead to child abuse. Matt Walsh is pro-child abuse. To be transphobic in general as an ideology increases the likelihood that child abuse occurs. To be for the bills in Texas and Florida increases the likelihood that child abuse occurs. So supporting those also makes it so that you support child abuse. The claims that the left is engaging in child abuse simply by, in a sterile setting of a fucking school, as I've repeated ad nauseum, explained simple sociological and biological concepts to children. The idea that that's child abuse is projection on the part of these people who are actually engaging in child abuse. If you hear the claim the left is doing child abuse by affirming the gender identity of trans kids, the response is no. The logical conclusion of your ideology as a right-winger claiming that this is happening is more child abuse happening. You have the pro-child abuse ideology. No kid gloves. It's time to stop caring about any kind of nuance in these people's arguments, especially the demagogues like Matt Walsh. Perhaps on an interpersonal basis, if you have a person that you maybe care about the opinions of a little bit more, you might want to be more careful with how you engage with the conversation. But when it comes to people like Matt Walsh and politicians, no kid gloves. It's not necessary. Just be forthright about it. They are projecting when they say that the left is engaging in this, they are pro-child abuse. Very obviously. You can logic it out. The stats bear it out. The rates of abuse in children bear it out when it comes to abstinence-only education, when it comes to a lack of sexual education in general, and everything else I've described. No reason to fall for the projection, for the smokescreen, for the deflection, the red herring that Matt Walsh is putting forward. Take the offense. Don't go on defense. Anyway. Oh, and I should add on, the additional element of Matt Walsh's support of the bills in Texas and Florida, and anybody's support of those bills, if they are not just completely uneducated, which Matt Walsh obviously isn't. He's a propagandist. He knows enough to be able to spew this propaganda. The logical extension of those bills is intimidation of the teachers and the parents of affirming their child's gender identity or sexual orientation or whatever. It is intimidation to make it so that you do not affirm your child's gender identity, and in that way leads to increased rates of suicidality, of attempts of suicide, of depression, of a variety of negative aspects that constitute child abuse as well. It is a method of eradicating the idea of people being trans from society, because if you can increase the suicide rates, you don't have to round them up in camps like I imagine Matt Walsh probably fantasizes about. You can just have them do it themselves by making life so terrible for them that they even make the drastic decision that nobody should have to take their own life. But in addition to this is the same that could be said for gay people. If you're a gay person, but you're not trans, if you're a cis gay person, and you think that shit's not going to come back to you just because the Supreme Court legalized gay in 2012, this is the same argument repeated, but for trans people. If it's the case that you don't think this is going to happen, if they are allowed to keep clawing back societal progress when it comes to gender identity and sexual orientation, and you don't think that's going to lead to an undoing of civil rights for other marginalized groups like black and brown people, you are sorely mistaken. You have to be in the fight for trans liberation against absolute fucking ghouls like this, or else if they are successful, they're going to keep fighting to claw back rights for gay people. They're going to keep fighting to claw back rights for literally any minority until their white supremacist world is finally realized. We have to fight back against it. You cannot be neutral. Also, arm trans people. Not everybody is responsible enough to have a firearm, much less like concealed carry a firearm. However, there are a variety of non-lethal self-defense implements you can have, like a stun gun or pepper spray, even a pocket knife, though that's not the most effective, unfortunately, that are less, likely to be used irresponsibly, that can increase your safety. If you are trans or gender non-conforming in society currently, shit's gonna get worse. Stuff like this is going to make militancy against trans people worse. It'll increase rates of physical and sexual assault. It'll increase rates of hate crimes. It'll increase rates of murders. This is the goal of conservatives, in order to scare people out of being open about being gay or trans or whatever else. It's the same methods that were used for, black and brown people. It's the same methods that they'll always use. They weaponize fear over sensationalized, fictionalized versions of reality that don't actually correlate to the reality we live in, because we live in a reality they don't want to live in. You got to be careful out there. Arm yourself if you can. Oh, and also, to end on a more positive note, like I said in previous installments of the series of me debunking the easily debunked, Matt Walsh, the trans stock is in an upwards trend and has been for a while. That's why these bills are coming about now. It is an act of desperation because they see the writing on the wall. These transphobes understand that more and more people are understanding themselves to be trans, more and more people are becoming accepting of trans identities. They have to try all they can through these kind of violent measures, implicit or explicit, in order to fight back against it, because they understand that it is currently not fashionable to shit on gay people in a similar capacity. You get in a lot of trouble in the media for that. Currently, it's acceptable to shit on trans people. I don't know why. I don't know how we've allowed this to happen, but it's a very profitable venture, which is why Matt Walsh engages in it. Regardless, more trans people are understanding themselves to be trans. More and more people are accepting of trans identities. Trans liberation is going to go in a similar way upwards, like gay people. The acceptance of gay people in society is at all-time highs, I would imagine. It's only been going up. So this is going to happen with trans people too, because much the same way as there's nothing wrong with being gay and it doesn't hurt anybody, there's nothing wrong with being trans and it doesn't hurt anybody. So keep your head up. It will get better. But we have to do the work to fight against this kind of shit, because these desperate attempts at control can manifest in a variety of negative outcomes. But trans stock is going up. This video's CONURE CALLOUT is redacted. Thanks so much for the support. Hope you keep on reloading. If you'd like to be the next CONURE CALLOUT, all you gotta do is follow me on Twitter at CONURECC. Retweet my video links when they go live. It's the same deal as it always has been. Remember to subscribe to the channel. Put all notifications on when you hit the bell. Leave a like if you'd like. Comment something in righteous support of trans people of the world down below. And have a great day as well, maybe.